Namaste and welcome to another episode of A Questioning Mind. I'm your host Sagarika and I'm very pleased today to have a new guest with me. Anish is an architect and I absolutely loved this conversation with my friend Suzanne on her channel. And I just, because this is a topic of so much interest to me, this is something that a lot of people, even in online circles, discuss quite a lot, the aesthetics of Bharatvarsh and how we live today versus how the ancients lived perhaps, and how it all came to be, and the future of Indian architecture is what we'd like to discuss. Anish, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be on your platform and address to your audience through this medium. And I really admire your work. I have listened to your previous conversations. It's quite
Thank you.
interesting and it's thought provoking often.
Thank you. So, for the viewers, today we've got two main parts to the discussion. In one part, we will be discussing Indian architecture. We'll go from temple architecture. We'll go from how Indian cities still have some Indian cities, like if you go to Kerala and all of them, some of them retain a sense of Indian architecture. And if it is possible to do so at scale, um, then we will come to urban planning, which is a nightmare at this time because building is always easier than rebuilding. And at this time, because we have so many major cities, the rebuilding is quite a hassle for anybody even attempting to plan it. So Anish, with his expertise on architecture as well as a little bit of insight into public policy with regards to urban planning, is best suited to give us insights on. So Anish, I can't wait to get started. As we begin, I'd actually like to ask you how you got into architecture and a little bit about yourself for the audience.
What I understood is that one of the most key criteria to being an architect is that you've just got to be passionate about designing. That's it. And there's no other skill required. It's only the passion for becoming an architect and going ahead with this is to follow your passion. Design and even ideating what can be done becomes quite difficult. So I do believe that skill sets is something which you can acquire with the time, but it's the passion which remains till the end, which actually takes you forward always. So it's the key ingredient.
So you always wanted to be an architect?
Definitely, I wanted to be an architect. I guess when I was in seventh standard.
Oh wow, that's a long time. That's pretty cool.
So it actually began with me making maps of the houses and the schools, and then mapping around how the pathways can come. And I wasn't really sure that this is what architecture is, at least in its initial phases. I was just thinking that I'm just doing some eccentric drawings, doing and probably zooming out from a bird's eye view and making things. And it just happened to be one of my uncles who was a civil engineer who just told me that you can be a good architect. And that got into me, and I always kept it alive within me that yes, this is something which I want to do. This is something which I'm really passionate about. And yeah.
That's pretty cool. Like I'm not sure that so many, even of my viewers, if you're watching this, do let us know what you wanted to be as a child and if you actually achieved it. Because I know I wanted to be an archaeologist. Then I was told that it's not very possible, viable in the country. Then become a geologist, and then excuse me, because I wanted to get my hands dirty, and then eventually a marine biologist. And then I figured that marine biologists aren't actually scuba diving in the ocean all of the time. So, but yeah, but it's pretty cool that you actually went and achieved your dreams. Now, to go back to the main subject of this conversation, um, can you tell us a little bit about Indian architecture and what it means and the variety that is there in, a country as large and broad as ours?
So basically, Indian architecture can be divided into multiple parts. Uh, we go with naming the architectural styles based on what faith the a particular group of people actually follows. As example, is the Hindu architecture, Buddhist architecture, Jain, and then there's Sikh Islamic, which comes much later.
Mm,
Uh, Starting with the Hindu architecture, it divides into two broader parts, which is the Nagar architecture style, which is in the northern India, and the other one is the Dravida architecture style, which is often also called as Dravidian style of architecture in the southern India. While the Jain architecture and the Buddhist architecture uh, are more focusing on stupas and viharas and the monasteries, which we can see, like for example, there's Sanchi Stup in the state of Madhya Pradesh, and then University of Nalanda, which was destroyed by Bakhtiyar Khilji, was very much in a Buddhist architectural style,
mm,
and same goes with the Takshashila University, which was in the present day Pakistan,
but
in the
nice.
current day Takshila
Mm,
city.
nice.
And then Islamic architecture. Basically, the Islamic architecture, at least in my perspective, is nothing but the Persian elements coming, uh, basically coming with the Arabian elements and then forming some sort of a different hybrid and then expanding throughout uh, the Asian subcontinent. And then it keeps changing. Every dynasty has to add uh, their own flavor to the Islamic architecture. Like, for example, the Mughal architecture is quite different from what we find in Safavid period in Iran. So these topics get more and more uh, branched out, and I think it's a different subject in its whole. Yeah.
Sure. So the Persian architecture with a little bit of Arab input is what passes for Mughal architecture in India. Of course, it is also it combines some of the Hindu architectural elements as well. So, with regards to Hindu architecture, I remember that while we look at our temples as architecturally extremely um, evolved because it depended. It's lasted for centuries, where many of them not destroyed by the invading Turkic rulers. They would, or Afghan traders and whoever else invaded. Many of them would still have lasted. We see with the few surviving examples, and so it showcases that a sense of sustainability over ages, but also architecturally they're pretty evolved because there's not a lot of mortar and cement forcing these parts to be together. It's very much like carpentry, which I think the Japanese have preserved, the joint based carpentry, and that's very similar to the large scale architecture we've done before. So is there a benefit to having architecture like that?
So much before when mortar actually came into the use primarily, we had the interlocking system,
Yeah.
and so basically, when they use the bricks to interlock with each other, the best part is that you're not really dependent on any other material. So and you save a lot. And the second thing is the interlocking system obviously ensures that the structure or the walls are much more strong. And this is why we see that the medieval architecture or even the ancient structures tend to stand for much longer than what the modern day buildings can.
Right, right.
They are more durable, definitely, anytime.
Okay, so with the temple reholds in Ayodhya, we saw some in the Kashi Vishwanath corridor as well. Do you expect these temples to last as long as the older ones have?
So,
Asking the style is very different. It is very
right,
modern. You can
right,
carve whatever you want there, but the building style is very different.
definitely. I mean, fortunately, I was in Kashi just 2 days ago, and I got the opportunity to get the darshan of Kashi Vishwanath, and I saw the Kashi Vishwanath corridor, which has been constructed by the current regime. One of the criticisms of this corridor is that it had violated the existing architectural norms. I mean, by saying existing, I mean what existed in the medieval period. It doesn't complement with what already existed over there. But the major criticism of the Kashi Vishwanath corridor is that it doesn't really have much of the Hindu motives and iconography. It
That's
doesn't really.
being done, right?
So
Is that not?
basically, the arches which have been made, the gates which are there, it has the floral patterns and which is quite often used in the Hindu temple architecture. But if we actually notice, even today in the South Indian temples, in the Dravidian style of architecture, we see that there are a lot of other deities who are
Sure.
installed basically
Yeah.
on the dwars, and sometimes we call them even dwarpas, and then we have yalis, and there are a lot of various other Hindu
Yakshas,
uh,
Gandharvas.
absolutely. So people think that omitting these elements out
Absolutely.
makes it less like an Hindu architecture. One more thing is, given the fact that Pinky Fuel five-pointed arch style, which is a form of art, is very commonly even seen in mosques and Islamic architecture, thanks to the Mughal architecture and the Mughal confluence in India. So people, at least what the Hindu devotees think is that there's not much to differentiate between the Gyanvati mosque, which exists right beside the Kashi Vishwanath corridor, and the corridor which has
Right.
point of view. And now, if I look at from a more modern perspective, I have a very positive outlook towards Kashi Vishwanath corridor, given the fact that I think it was in need of an art, because we know that how the streets and the lanes get narrower the
Yes.
moment you start entering the Kashi Vishwanath temple itself.
It was honestly horrible. It was claustrophobic. I know I went with a friend who could not even do darshan because she got so fearful of the claustrophobia was so immense, and it was a pretty terrible experience. Also a security issue because the streets are very narrow and everybody has to be checked right at the entrance. And if somebody can slip in with something, it's actually it was pretty
Right,
bad. Yeah.
right, yeah. So what I understand is that the modern architecture, the contemporary functionality rather than the aesthetics. At least this is what the message the Kashi Vishwanath corridor is trying to send. That they cared, I mean, the designer, I mean, and specifically to say architect Bimal Patel, who designed it,
Yeah.
was more focused on the functionality of the structure than actually any other cultural sentiments and other aspects. Yeah.
Do you think it's like I mentioned, my original question was about longevity. Do you expect it to last quite as long because it does not use the methods that the older temples did?
So I think it again depends, because longevity is something which is directly dependent on how conservation is being done also. There are really amazing temples and structures which sadly couldn't last very long, only because people did not maintain it. So somewhere the usability also comes into the picture. The more a building is being used or a structure is being used, it tends to be maintained even more. We often see that the houses which are abandoned turns into shackles quite quickly. So there are various aspects to it. Yeah.
All right. Can you list out some of the main differences between Nagara architecture and Dravidian architecture?
Yeah. So one of the primary difference between the Nagar and the Dravidian is the very skeleton itself is quite different, given the fact that uh, there's more emphasis given on the campus, the inner walls and the outer walls in the Dravida architecture, which is not quite often architecture style tends to be more lofty. I mean, the temples which we see in the northern India, like for example, we have Somnath in Gujarat. The structure is quite lofty. Similarly, we see this even with Ram Mandir, which is being constructed, or we see this with Selika Mandir and Sas Bahu Temple in Gwalior Fort, which was created in the medieval period. Uh,
Mm.
is in the Rajputana confluence region. So we see these temples tend to be loftier and are taller in general, while the Dravidian architecture uh, are much more broader, and
Mm.
it has elaborate gopurams. Gopurams are
Right.
basically the tower-like structures which comes much before the Garbhagriha, the main sanctum region of the temple. So this is a very broad architecture. But again, the Dravidian architecture style is something which branches out into multiple other uh,
Sure.
styles. Yeah,
Yeah.
based upon the dynasties and the empires and the kingdoms.
Yeah. So, actually, I think I have a little more experience of the Southern Indian style as opposed to the Northern ones. But um, do you think that? Oh, I actually meant from a point of building the interlocking joints and all. That's I think still followed, and at least it's well preserved in the Dravidian architectural style. I don't see that so much in the northern part. Do you ever expect something like that to happen again? I know Isha Ashram has done it with some of their structures. I don't know if it's even a thought in any in other places when it comes to temple building.
Right. So I'm not quite sure if we can get to see what happened in the medieval period again. And I have a very different perspective to conserving the traditional style of architecture. So, given the fact that the way I understand architecture is it is dependent on air and the climate. Light
True.
and the air plays a big role in it. And it's well known to us that the climate has changed a lot.
Mm.
Meenakshi temple in Madurai, one would notice that they have installed air conditioner within the Garbhagriha of the temple. Now it really doesn't look that good because the aesthetics of the temple has gone. But again, I think it was also the need of an hour because the crowd has increased so much, and then the, due to the global warming, people would suffocate to death if there's no air
Absolutely.
conditioner
Absolutely.
within the Garbhagriha. So somewhere the design structures and the skeleton of the temple, which we know probably 1,000 years ago, is something which we cannot really follow today. But this is something which probably Hindus and the devotees and the people who use these spaces quite often need to understand and evolve.
All right. Um, So I found it very interesting, to visit IIM Ahmedabad and I think IIM Bangalore as well. Very very beautiful architecture, very suitable to at least the older IIM Ahmedabad campus. There's a part of it that is newly constructed, and the difference is quite so obvious because if you go to the older part, it's Ahmedabad, so it's hot. It's already hot, but you do not feel that. Heat as much. You can walk easily in the gardens, and you're quite comfortable. And as soon as you go on to the to the newer part, the heat reflects off the concrete quite. Significantly, and you immediately feel the difference in temperature and um, even though it looks modern and all that, but the older part looks classic in that sense. And so, when we have a skeletal model of something that has functioned successfully, what do you think pushes people to build in a direction that's not quite so sustainable?
Firstly, I would like to say that your observation is absolutely on point, and I mean, you have already got it, given the fact that concrete is something which is not favorable to the Indian climate, at
Hmm.
least for the place such as Ahmedabad. This is something which I also noticed in Chandigarh, given the fact
Right.
that right after the independence of India, Punjab did not have a capital.
Yeah.
After the partition, Lahore had gone to Pakistan. and we needed a new capital. Patiala and Ludhiana weren't constructing a new capital itself. And hence, the first Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru, came up with a project of designing a new city called Chandigarh. I would say somewhere it was our colonial hangover, which called upon a decision which is not quite favorable for India. So basically, the first Prime Minister of India ended up inviting Le Corbusier, who was a French architect, quite famous, a master architect, but whatever structure he has created is not really favorable to the surrounding over there, given the fact that there is no element of heritage in Chandigarh at all. It really doesn't feel that the architecture really reflects the Punjabi ethos,
True.
if I say this quite boldly. And this is why we see a lot of these concrete structures and the brutalist style of architecture which has come into being, which was also influenced by the Soviet style of architecture, which was a more of a Marxist sort of a school. Uh, we see that somewhere there was a degeneration within the designing of the structures itself. Now we had moved away from creating structures which were intricately carved towards the plain concrete facades which has no taste at all. So while within the architectural fraternity, by majority we still consider Chandigarh to be one of the most planned cities and a great
Mhm.
wonder. People like me, or even uh, some other people from our school, tend to believe that it is not quite a good example as a city.
I know that even Sanjeev Sanyal, who has been involved in the smart city planning, and he's mentioned why it is not. So it's a very stagnant way. Even the sure it's suitable for those who've retired and are intending to stay put with 4 cars per household, but it's not a very viable city to build economies of scale when it comes to businesses or industry. So I get that. But the thing with Colonial Hangover is that even the IIM Ahmedabad campus, the older campus, is designed by Louis Kahn, who is German. So that seems to have slipped through. And I also love the designs by Laurie Baker, who worked more towards the southern part of the country. I think he's designed elsewhere as well, but his architecture is very reflective of the Indian ethos, the climate, and I think that's one person whose work actually makes me ask and kind of look forward to hope. Um, if we can build a larger scale homes and areas which are vertically sustainably built, which aren't just broad because we don't have that space anymore. And it's completely fair. I'm not really of the opinion that populations should kind of die off or we need to reverse our TFR. But in order to make spaces that are available to a majority of the population, the kind of architecture that Louis Baker pioneered in the country is. Let me just try and pull up some of the pictures because, sorry, Laurie Baker. I don't know why I said Louis Baker, but yeah, Laurie Baker. Some of his works. It's got the jalis which sort of showcase which allow a lot of the natural elements to come through as well, and some of it does, the tall buildings as well. So is that something that's possible, do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, Laurie Baker is one of the most respected architects in India, and he started a revolution because he was the person who brought back the mud brick back to the
Right.
mainstream market,
It's
which
so
was
lovely. It looks a little dilapidated now, but they're just absolutely lovely buildings with a little, requirement for conservation, but very suitable, I think, no?
absolutely. I mean, it's quite suitable for Indian climate. Also, one of the major plus of the brick structures is that it helps in passive cooling technique also. it really doesn't radiate as much as concrete does. So the building
Absolutely.
tends to be cooler from within. Yeah.
Do you see these being implemented in modern times, something like this?
So there are certain architects in Goa and Kerala, and then there's DB contractors in Himachal Pradesh, though DB contractor is no longer with us, but her firm is still working on these sort of projects in Dharmale in Himachal Pradesh. It's quite near to Dharmshala. And there are a lot of emerging new architectural firms which are coming up with. I won't really name because uh, I'm not allowed to.
Sure.
So, but uh, I'm quite optimistic that there is a quite positive churn which is going on within the architectural fraternity. People have begun to realize that we've got to move away from the glass and concrete and probably derive to newer solutions. And also, there is somebody in Rajasthan. I really cannot
Right, the
recall.
school, right? The girls'
Yes,
school. It's
yes.
absolutely lovely. I'll bring that up as well. I also know that there's this idea of air conditioning through modern brick um, structures, installations with water running through. It's a very natural means of cooling, but it's outside the house and the wind sort of blows that in. So these sort of ideas are existent. So just yeah, let's go Rajasthan, Indian architecture.
Yes,
It's a great example. The one that you mentioned, I think it's Rajkumari Ratnavati Girls School.
right.
It's been built by Diana Kellogg, or is it sponsored by her? But it's
She's
absolutely
the
lovely. Let
architect.
me share it.
She's the
She's the
and
architect, or
it's sponsored by Chaitanya Raj Singh, king of Jaisalmer
yeah.
from the family of Bhati. Yeah.
Sorry, did I? Were you able to see Laurie Baker's works on screen? Was that showing previously?
Yes, it was.
Oh,
So yeah,
good.
I was able to
Yeah.
see it. Yes.
So yeah, this is how it looks. It has no internally installed air conditioning, but the children are quite comfortable. So it's very lovely. How does this it being an oval affect the elements?
So
It's in
basically,
the middle of the desert.
right. So I think one of the main reason also to go for elliptical structure could also be that nowadays uh, we discourage coming up with right angle structures for the small children, basically, for because sharp edges and the vertical edges are not children friendly, while the organic shapes the such as ovals and circles are much more friendlier, given the fact that there is no risk of children hurting themselves. And we see this quite often. And it's a very small thinking. I mean, uh, this is how architects really think. We just really go into thinking uh, into smaller aspects that, how uh, a ball can also hurt a child. So this has to be thought a lot. And these uh, these issues are what actually drives us into coming up with some different unique structure linear time.
I've noticed even in modern architecture, if I were to even see the Pinterest trends in certain places, even in a smaller space, a lot of people are going with the arches instead of the right angle doorways. So it just gives an illusion of more space, taller uh, arches, taller spaces, and a lot of more negative space is sort of the illusion that it creates. So I've noticed that. I know it was very typical to Indian architecture to have that and to even have the wooden arches inside, and even within the even when we had the cement doorways, the wooden part is always there. And so those were made into arches, sometimes more elaborate as well, even in the smallest houses. So I've seen that being, something that is being done even in other houses elsewhere, like in Europe and the US. Some of these people are a lot more conscious now. So anything that is called sustainable is priced extremely high. I know there are certain builders in. I'm more familiar with Bangalore. I'm not quite sure. I've seen a lot of architects working in Kerala towards I think the preference of most Kerala citizens is also just Kerala residents is also just to have a traditional Indian style, but it's not so common in Bangalore due to the real estate prices. And
Right.
anything that is labeled sustainable and has that exposed brick and uh, that sort of look, it's priced extremely high. Is there a way to make this more reasonable and more achievable for a majority of residents? Because without that, how do we achieve the economies of scale, right?
Right. So, one of the good points which you picked up was from Kerala, in the fact that we noticed that they still have a lot of roof. I mean, they have the sloped roof structures still, and they prefer going for the wooden structures because it really complements with their uh, local surroundings and even the locally available elements over there. Now, coming to a big city such as Bangalore, and Gurgaon, and Noida, we see that the real estate has really changed the way the market really functions. Now, even if an architect has to, design something in a Kerala style within Bangalore, it really becomes very difficult for an architect and for a client to derive to that certain design, given the fact that the the materials which you are trying to find or look for in the market tend to be much more expensive than what it is for the villagers who are actually just going around with practicing vernacular architecture in the tier two and tier three cities. One more issue in big metropolitans is that industrialization sort of brainwash people into thinking that you cannot really think beyond concrete and glass. And somewhere the real estate owners do not really see buildings as something which really, you know, uh, manifests some sort of uh, energy or manifest some sort of
Awesome.
ambience, but they see structures more like uh, a product which needs to be sold to the client and just finish it off. So we see that there is a lot of gap between how an architect is thinking and how a real estate uh, person is thinking, or even how a civil engineer is thinking nowadays, because civil engineers have been molded into thinking that you can only work with concrete and glass, otherwise the structure is not going to be quite strong. So somewhere, I think there is a need for revolution down the line. Yeah,
I hope it comes soon because we're in a space where everything is glass and steel. And once offices, once, industries or people with more capital pick it up, it's very hard to go back because SEZs are constructed in that very grotesque manner, which is completely unsuitable and unsustainable to India. But I noticed that even when it comes to glass and chrome, I was in Ahmedabad some months ago, which is when I noticed this, that there were some buildings that actually had very narrow windows. Like if you see, most of them have very large, tall glass facades, and there was some that made sure that the the windows were narrow and they had protruding cement. So that I thought was very smart because that prevents the sun from reflecting straight out, and it also does not reduces the energy requirement inside the building. It heats a lot less. So these kind of small ideas are somehow lacking in a majority of builders. I know also the new fad is to have green spaces, but the green spaces are also extremely manicured. They're just manicured lawns, ornamental hedges, not a lot of Indian trees and shrubs and plants that are also, that can grow naturally, which is something that IIM Ahmedabad has. I think IIM Bangalore has a little bit of, because the architect is a protege of Louis Kahn, and I think he passed
right.
away recently, right? BB Doshi.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, but these things are not something that is part of is that a function of GDP? Do you think that we'll have to become richer as a country to start thinking like that, or do you think it can go parallelly? Is that a thought process that is being implemented in architectural schools?
So I don't think we really need to wait for anything as such big as GDP and so on and so forth.
Good.
It's something which can go parallelly quite often because given the fact that when we were we just recovered from independence right after 1947, there were architects in the market who were very Balakrishna Vittal Joshi, who passed away quite recently this year still, and he left a legacy. And we see that IIM Bangalore, which was designed by him, is a perfect example of how a structure basically complements with the environment. Given the fact that in a city like Bangalore, we really do not need an air conditioner. But then what the corporates do is they create glass boxes and then they install air conditioners the size of the window and probably opened it and have shafts for the building, and it would have worked quite fantastically. But we never did that. I mean, it was environment which was trying to push us to think differently, but somewhere we thought that no, we just got to copy the West somehow, and we really dropped our own brain down the line.
It's impressive because the entire country is built like that. Our dams are built like that. We've essentially copied a European template, which is, without consideration for how absolutely different our climatic conditions are. It's not we don't have perennial river systems. We have monsoon-based river systems. We don't have temperate climates. We have tropical climates. And I think Bangalore, I've personally witnessed over the last decade of the rise in temperature. Every summer, people are like, oh my God, it's the hottest it's ever been. And then the next year is hotter, even hotter. I used to live in this part of the city called Electronic City, and 10 years ago, and it was actually 3 degrees lower than the other part of the city, and now it's hotter because of the kind of construction that has gone on. So, with regards to offices and shops, etc., one thing I've noticed is this is peculiar to perhaps post-colonial nations with that colonial trauma. Because if I go to Glasgow or if I go to Edinburgh, the architecture of a Zara and an H&M fits into the existing architecture. They do not create a separate building that is built of glass and chrome. I mean, unless one were to go to Dublin or Glasgow, which is, and look for offices, there is still a lot of the old architecture that is prevalent, and brands do not find it necessary to impose a sort of more brutalist style of buildings. They just fit into whatever exists. And that, from a policy level, is that possible to be implemented in the country? I actually think there's not enough old architecture even preserved here. So, what will they fit into anyway? So I don't blame them. I'm just wondering if it's possible to go back or create the new, with a hybrid.
I think when it really comes to design itself, uh, it's less of a policy and more of a mindset also, given the fact that somewhere when the clients have to accept that we really need to come up with some big change because there was a very famous architect called Franco Gehry. I mean, he is still there, sorry to say that. And architect exists because of a great client. Client and architect complement each other. As long as client is supportive of bringing in change, an architect can go ahead with it because you, after all, it's an architect who's working as per what the client needs. So somewhere, if we can make people uh, realize that this is you need something different as a so I don't think this might really need anything on a policy level as such, because then there are nations, even such as Saudi Arabia, which is a monarchy, which is doing quite well in urban planning and urban design, and the policies will obviously, uh, find its own way, be it democracy or be it monarchy or any other form of government. Uh, it's on we have to actually design our own cities, like even after 75 years of independence.
So I will say that, look, I mean, it's easy to sort of think that the client does not know enough, but every client is tied down by their own budgets because they know how much they can invest. Also, I have not met a lot of architects who push for any style that is less modern. I've never had that happen. They most architects anyway, they get their business from existing structures, so the creation of new ones is not as much of a thought process, and they're trying to fulfill functional aspects. So I think if it's implemented in architectural schools, if this is a school of thought, the Indian architecture is something that is taught. Is that currently something that is taught as a major subject, or are we still dependent on the European studies?
Sadly to say, there are two great civilizations of the world which had quite advanced architectural books written. One is India and another one is China. China preserved its identity. We did not. We have Vastu Shastra, which is one of the finest ever books written on
Sure.
architecture ever, and it's not taught in Indian architecture schools. So I do quite agree with it that there is a problem within the academia also. And as for the creative thinking, it's something which is quite missing in the architecture schools. Not to say that creativity is not something which is nurtured as such to say in the Indian colleges, but it's something which comes up with its own limitations always. I mean, there's petty ego of probably many a times the faculty. Sometimes there's petty ego of seniors, which comes into play. Given the fact that we have the concept of ragging also in the Indian colleges a lot. So under the garb of ragging, many a times the juniors are ragged even for thinking quite differently and not going with the mainstream convention of what has been practiced in the institution. Given the fact that every Indian architecture school has its own tradition and history of the way they think and design. Like, for example, the school which I come from really focused on the manual drafting skills, given the fact that we actually worked manually for village documentation, which is quite rare for new schools such as Acharya in Bangalore or RV in Bangalore. So the traditions are something which needs to be conserved while we do not really reject the people who are coming up with something else, which, the people who strive to go out of the system and bring in some new changes.
Right. Um, so it's not very prevalent on the Indian style being taught. Is sustainable architecture something that is picking up? Because I know this label is thrown around a lot, so I'm just hoping that perhaps it became trendy. And uh, is that a school that's being explored?
Yes, definitely. Sustainable architecture is one field which is coming up quite well, especially in countries such as United Kingdom. In fact, this is something which I'm looking forward towards, and we are integrating this into various subjects such as urban and regional planning, or be it urban design, or coming up, integrating this with landscape architecture or even interiors. So sustainability is a concept which is the need of an hour. Also, one more interesting culture which is coming up uh, in the mainstream is basically that we have began to realize that how we can recycle the waste materials and use it for the consumption. Like, for example, the plastic bottles. Now, what? Now this thing was rejected by the Westerners 10 years ago. It was called "yaar bahut jugadu hai," and it's like uh, I mean, we have our own terms to throw on the people, like, you're just doing jugaad or something. But now people have begun to realize that this is not a jugaad, or this is something which is quite cool and we can work out with. So I feel that there is a bright future ahead.
All right, so why I mentioned policy was what struck me is that if larger conglomerates such as Godrej or L&T or someone's fighting, even Adanis are fighting for I mean, they all have successfully bid for the Dharavi redevelopment. If there were a policy that sort of, because I'll tell you, I have discussed this, like I said, it's a topic of my interest, and I've kind of spoken with people in the construction business, not so much. So I asked them about the material and if they're stocking material for sustainable development, like you mentioned, the recycled materials, bricks, bricks suitable for exposed brick architecture. They don't. For the most part, people across the country do not stock this, which makes the price of building these structures go up. So, if these people were to bid higher to develop it in a way that is very suitable for Indian styles, and I'll tell you, there's a lot of planning that goes into these things. When it comes to Dharavi, is like a small township within itself, and if we look at the Brazilian favelas and how they function and they keep the family structure alive because it's broader rather than the buildings that Mahara has done in the rest of Mumbai, where it's, narrower and people do not get to interact with each other. It raises the rate of crime. And because it's disconnected from the rest of their neighbors, this is something that's very common. Now, if somebody like this is, there's a policy to encourage them to build better, build something that suits its potential residents. I think that can be deeply impactful. Do you see any push in that direction? Because I've started some of the bureaucratic material in this, and there's nothing in terms of policy.
Right. To be honest, I don't see any policy as such as this has been thought of as of now. Though I see, to be on an optimistic side, I see that there is a potential through the work such as smart cities, which is picking up now quite slowly. But
So, what
smart
did you?
cities is,
What is
I
this?
said, sorry,
I didn't hear you. Such as
smart cities,
mass city,
smart cities.
smart city. Sorry. Okay, smart city.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So the work related to smart cities is going on, given the fact that we are integrating AI tools also into this. And I see that it's going to usually impact on how the policies are going to be formed now. I mean, after we are done with integrating metaverse with uh, the existing architecture, there are architects who are coming up in the world of metaverse also, who are coming up with designs which are not possible in the real world. So probably, the policies will have to come up uh, related to this also. And this is something which we can only show what I mean. It's very hard to predict where we are going towards now. So I'm just I would rather say that I'll take a back seat and look at the game and probably eat popcorn and see what's going on now. Yeah.
Well, this is very interesting because I had a guest a long time ago, and we somehow got we were discussing the future of metaverse and virtual reality on that matter, and he had mentioned how Indian heritage sites can be incorporated onto virtual reality and prevent footfall. That also like. It would be more exclusive, and tourists would have to pay much higher to visit those sites in person, so that it could be more sustainable and we'd have less of the issues that we're facing in the Uttarakhand and ecologically sensitive areas like Himachal Pradesh. Because it's completely uncontrolled. So yeah, that was one of the ideas. But this was mentioned: the metaverse integration of heritage sites and architecture, Indian architecture, onto this. Maybe I'll link that here. I've also found that the AI generated images of Indian cities is, it's great nostalgia invoking in a sense for something that we've never really witnessed. But if we pass by the ghats of Banaras, one can get an idea of how such a fertile land bore such a heavy population with some chaos, but there was order in that chaos, and everybody, flourished in that area for quite a long time. And so I find that very interesting, and I'm so glad that you brought it up. That the Indian that metaverse is being thought about in terms of Indian architecture. Um, I think we've moved from the part about individual structures to urban planning at this point. I did have a couple more questions about urban planning, about the structures, but I can't really think of it right now. But yeah, in terms of the smart city, so yeah, one other thing with regards to policy is that incentives and disincentives are very simple means of making things work. Like if the architecture is created in a manner that is more sustainable, if SEZs are provided on the basis of um, sustainable architecture, it's quite possible to ensure that this becomes more commonplace.
Uh, yes, it's one way forward. Um, I also have one more different take towards this. And the
Sure.
fact that nowadays, architects are actually quite focusing on the active cooling techniques and the active means of, bringing down the energy consumption within the houses or whatever buildings they're designing, uh, in order to ensure that whatever they construct is more sustainable. There is another school of thought which says, and which is a bit more conservative one, is which I think I had also spoken about the same in the previous podcast also, is that the buildings which were constructed in the medieval and the ancient times uh, were quite sustainable by the nature itself, because one of the major reasons is the moment a building is durable. Let's say if I construct a house which uh, exists for next 1,000 years, rather than me constructing a house which
Absolutely.
would, wear out within 50 years, and then we've got to replace it and break it down and then construct one more house. The very process of construction itself impacts on the environment. So if we can reduce the number of constructions which goes down by constructing the buildings which guarantees that it's quite durable,
Mm.
then this itself is quite sustainable by itself. And probably, we can think this way, but people won't, because this really doesn't uh, suit the real estate uh, and other businesses which run.
Yeah, I'm skeptical of that too because one, it's not taught in schools. Two, it's something that does not have a policy incentive to it. So why would anyone change? Change has to be driven by policy or some, I don't know what drives it, because climate change is certainly not creating that impetus in anybody working on these buildings. I just want to share for the audience some of the AI images that I have found quite interesting. This is from the ancient city of Varanasi and how it is envisioned previously. Um, I mean, of course, these are images, but these are AI images, but it's quite impressive. The kind of it does invoke that sense of well, Banaras as it exists today, how Kashi exists today. It um, just sort of extrapolates from it, I think. So it's not very different, but it's
Mm.
interesting. I've seen more, I think, less chaotic images, which I cannot really locate right now, but they showed a little more structure to how the banks could separate these buildings, and the buildings could be more close, but still have enough space. Uh, one thing with regards to smart city, are we looking at building parks or anything, because access to nature is something that is denied to most Indian people in urban spaces, and this is something that has very very detrimental effects on physical as well as mental health.
Right. So the centralized park is a concept which is uh, coming up in smart cities nowadays. And if we actually go to cities such as Noida, like for example, this Sector 50, which is quite well developed. You see that within every block there's a pocket of. I mean, they have created the pockets of spaces, which are meant to be the green zone. So it acts like some sort of a lung of that particular region. Now, this is something. This is a very simple idea which needs to be implemented everywhere. As for smart cities itself, I think whether smart cities plays a role in it or not, this is something which, as a community, we should also have a consciousness about. Given the fact that smart cities is something which is more focused on IoT currently and surveillance than more of planning as of now, as much as I see. And urban design is an element which is completely missing because Navi Mumbai was a big success, but what I understand is that urban designers had almost negligible role to play in this still. So maybe there are economical reasons for this too, given the fact that we have still not found out a way that how we, improve the cities rather than constructing a new city itself.
So this is a difficult task. I know that creating, building a city, planning a city from the get-go is easier from an idealistic perspective, and a lot of people are very disappointed that current cities are absolute nightmares to navigate. Um, how would an overhaul work, even if we were to go about it slowly?
Right. So as I was saying that every city has its own identity. For example, Kashi's identity is the river. It's River Ganga. While the identity of Delhi is Yamuna. The identity of Bangalore is the greenery. So with
Many
retaining the
lakes.
many lakes, but then yeah, we know that the
The
lakes
disappeared lakes, yeah. The many disappeared lakes.
again, it has been
Varthur
killed.
Lake is currently being disappeared, by the way, in front of my eyes while I'm living here. I don't know what to do, but look, we needed one part of it to go because it was a traffic nightmare. I understand that was necessary, but the rest of the lake is also being disappeared as we speak. So, what does the citizen do?
Right. So quite fortunately, where I live in Bangalore, the lake is being regenerated and cleaned out by an NGO called Lake Man. They are doing quite a good job over here. I
So,
hope
is that
that.
Varthur?
Sorry.
Is that the Varthur Lake you're talking about?
No, no, no.
Oh,
It's a lake
okay.
by electronicity itself. So I think NGOs have a quite big role to play over here. But again, the question comes that which NGOs are genuine and which NGOs
No,
are
it's not
just,
even that. If we leave this to non-governmental organizations, which are in conflict with the government, it's always going to create a very difficult time because the government is not going to listen to any of the recommendations they offer, and they will always protest against any small developmental aspect of it, right? So I get that when I was in Navi Mumbai for a bit, and they were planning to turn this mangrove area into. It was already inaugurated by I think the chief minister of the time or someone into a golf course. Is that a requirement for a golf course in Navi Mumbai? This is not to house the homeless or anything. This is a mangrove area. It was already protected. They violated a court order to try and develop it, and that's when citizens protested. And somehow, I think, for the time being, not all of it has been converted. But this is the kind of thing that happens, and so obviously, those protesting against this are going to be against any other development, also because there's a sense of distrust that has been created. So, I do believe in policy requirements being absolutely necessary. If we leave it to citizens without, who aren't collaborating absolutely with the government, I know that a lot of NGOs are very, very. They're doing great work, especially in terms of lake rejuvenation in Bangalore. But is it okay to have them in conflict with the larger bodies?
absolutely. In fact, one of the examples of NGO and NGO versus government was something which I witnessed during my village documentation in the college days. Uh, I won't really name the NGO over here, but the village of Anegundi, which is right next to the ancient city of Hampi, which was once the capital of Vijayanagar Empire in Uttar Karnataka. Uh, so there's a quite beautiful river over there, which is called the Tungabhadra River, and the NGO was not letting the government construct a bridge, uh, which was something which was needed, and the villagers wanted it. It was their demand, and the NGO did not let this happen because NGOs think quite differently, and many times NGOs end up being those non-democratic forces who really do not represent the common people. So sometimes NGOs can be quite problematic. Also, it's not always uh, it's not always what they depict in general. And I won't really name the NGO over here, but then I did see that there was a lot of other chaos which was going behind the scenes. The way they infiltrated the library of the village also, and they removed certain books which did not suit their ideology and the mindset. So
Wow.
there's a lot of inner politics which goes over here. So yeah,
Right. So yeah, what do you think is the way forward for a more collaborative approach to urban planning? Is there any way for citizens to participate in, just maybe it's not just citing requirements, but for example, is traffic data being studied, at least in nightmare cities like Mumbai and Bangalore and Noida?
right. So I think one way is to strengthen the municipal corporations in India, and the fact that the kind of political system we have, municipalities really do not find voice in between of the political ruckus. It's always the MLAs and the MPs who have more to say, more than a mayor, which is who is democratically elected by the citizens of the city. And somewhere when we remove that representative itself from the picture, we see there are consequences. We do not see this much of a problem in Canada or US because in cities such as Toronto or even in New York, the mayors are given a lot of power, which is quite important, which is not the case in India. So we can just, probably revive our own institutions, such as the municipal corporations itself, to derive to uh, solving this problem.
That's very interesting. All right, Anish, I would love to have you on the channel again, but I think as of now we should be wrapping it up. We're over the hour. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I look forward to speaking again.
Thank you so much, ma'am.